Beneath the limestone walls of an abandoned convent in Savannah lies a chapel that hasn't been opened in nearly 3 centuries. When investigators finally broke the seal, they found 23 letters the church tried to destroy, letters describing a miracle so forbidden it could have rewritten the history of faith itself. Beneath the limestone walls of St. Catherine's Convent in Savannah lies a secret the church buried 3 centuries ago. The convent itself is silent now, its windows bricked, its gardens reclaimed by moss and ivy. Yet behind one of those sealed doors stands a chapel no one has entered since 1749. Locals call it the Room of the Vow. They say if you press your ear against the wall on a quiet night, you can still hear someone praying inside. What happened within those walls began in the summer of 1748, a season of suffocating heat, when the air above the Georgia marshes shimmered like molten glass. Savannah was young then, barely 15 years old but already corrupting under its own prosperity. Rice plantations spread along the riverbanks, and with them came the trade in human lives. At the edge of town, the whitewashed buildings of St. Catherine's stood like a vision from Europe, French-built, severe and shining under the coastal sun. To the citizens, the convent represented purity amid temptation. To the nuns inside, it was a furnace of discipline and faith. Among them was Sister Marie Terzlair, a woman whose name still lingers like incense in the city's darker folklore. She had come from Quebec 7 years earlier, sent to reform St. Catherine's after rumors of laxity reached the Archbishop's ear. At 51, Marie Terzlair was the embodiment of austerity. Thin, tall eyes the color of stormwater, her presence alone could silence a corridor. She rarely smiled, never laughed, and seemed to breathe rules instead of air. The younger nuns feared her, but they obeyed her absolutely. Under her command, confession became mandatory 3 times a week. Prayers were timed to the minute. Every gesture, every silence, every breath was catalogued and judged. And yet, for all her rigidity, something restless had begun to move behind those grey eyes. Working in the convent's library was a 17-year-old enslaved youth named Thomas. Unlike most in bondage, he could read and write, skills taught by a former owner before debt forced his sale. Within the convent he handled correspondence, copied texts, repaired bindings, and kept the shelves in perfect order. To the sisters he was a shadow, present but unseen. To Sister Marie Terzlair he was an instrument of efficiency, no more personal than the quills he sharpened, or so everyone believed. That summer's heat drove the nuns to pray late into the night. They sought cool air in the chapel's stone corridors, whispering psalms by candlelight while cicadas screamed outside. And it was during those nights that Sister Marie's habits began to change. For 7 years her routine had been flawless: morning prayers at 4:30, meditation at 6, Mass at 7, evening prayers at 8. But now she appeared long after midnight alone. She claimed the Holy Spirit called her to deeper communion. No one dared question her. After all, she was the convent's moral spine, until the morning of October 3rd, 1748. Sister Agnes Fontaine, keeper of linens, entered the laundry room at dawn and found a nightdress soaking in a basin. It was Sister Marie's, marked with blood, not from a wound, but in the familiar pattern every woman recognized: menstruation. Only Sister Marie hadn't menstruated in 4 years. Agnes washed the garment 3 times, hung it to dry in secret, and said nothing. But rumor moves like water through stone. Within weeks, small signs became impossible to ignore: Sister Marie's fainting spells, her constant fatigue, the discreet adjustments to her robes. When she finally collapsed during morning prayer, the convent's physician, Sister Catherine Mercier, examined her. Moments later, she emerged from the infirmary pale as wax. "I've checked 3 times," she whispered. "She's with child." The news struck the convent like a thunderclap. A woman of 51, long vowed to chastity, carrying life? Impossible. Within hours, whispers spread beyond the walls, carried to merchants, priests, even the docks. That evening, in a room smelling of beeswax and damp wood, the convent's leadership gathered: Mother Superior Josephine Beaumont, Sister Catherine and Father Benedict Hammond, chaplain since Savannah's founding. Sister Marie sat before them, hands folded, face serene. "Tell us the truth, Sister," the Mother Superior said softly. "How did this happen?" Marie Terzlair met their eyes without fear. "It is a blessing from God," she said. The Lord has chosen me as his vessel, as he once chose the Virgin Mary. Silence, thick, unbearable. The priest's chair scraped the floor. You claim immaculate conception. I claim only what I know, she replied. I have kept my vows, yet within me life moves. If you doubt, examine my conscience. Father Hammond left that night for Charleston to summon the Archbishop. By the next morning, Savannah buzzed with scandal. Merchants paused their trade to whisper. Planters postponed meetings. Even slaves in the fields spoke of the nun who said God had made her pregnant. In the quarters behind the convent, Thomas heard the news in silence. Those who shared his cramped cabin said he neither ate nor spoke for days. At night they heard him weeping. Only he knew the truth the church would spend months trying to bury. The Archbishop's reply came swiftly. An investigation, physicians, interrogation, secrecy. 3 doctors examined Sister Marie in late October. All agreed, 15 weeks pregnant, perfectly healthy. No sign of disease or anomaly. Natural conception, they wrote, not divine. The church sent Bishop Marcus Fenwick and Father Thomas Donnelly, a Jesuit renowned for extracting truth. For 4 days they questioned her. Her answers never changed. I am innocent. God did this. Then the bishop asked a single name. Do you know a young man called Thomas? For the first time she hesitated. 3 seconds, no more, but enough. Yes, she said. He works in the library. Because, the bishop replied, Thomas has requested to speak with me. He claims to know the truth about your child. That meeting became legend among those few who read the church's sealed archives. A 17-year-old enslaved man, trembling before bishops and priests, revealing a story that defied both science and theology. He told them Sister Marie had studied forbidden medical journals, French experiments with animals, where conception occurred without physical union. She called it divine demonstration. She'd approached him not with seduction, but with command. He would provide his seed. She would use a glass syringe procured from Charleston. No contact, no sin, only proof that faith and knowledge could merge. At first he refused, but she promised him freedom. Papers already prepared, signed, stamped. Freedom for obedience. And so on 8 nights between June and August within the locked storage chapel, the impossible was attempted. On the 8th, success. When Thomas finished, the room fell silent. The bishop removed his spectacles. This is blasphemy, he whispered, and yet no act of the flesh occurred. Thomas lowered his eyes. She used me, my lord. She forged the papers. There was never freedom. The church confined him for protection, from mobs already gathering outside, from planters demanding vengeance, from righteous fury that never sought truth. Inside the convent, fear replaced faith. The sisters prayed behind locked doors. The students were sent home. Confession lines stretched into hours. Savannah itself seemed poisoned, a city of whispers and torches waiting for permission to burn. When the tribunal convened on November 15, 1748, 5 clergymen sat beneath the chapel's vaulted ceiling. They questioned Sister Marie again. Their voices echoing off stone, she spoke without trembling. If God created nature, she argued, then to use nature's laws is to honor him. Doctors use his knowledge to heal. I used it to create. Is that not the same? Her logic unsettled them. It was heresy wrapped in scripture, but the tribunal's patience shattered when they confronted her with the forged papers, the deception of Thomas, the chaos she had unleashed. The verdict came before sunset. She would be defrocked, expelled, exiled to Charleston until birth. The child taken, the name erased. Thomas sold north for his safety, or his silence. When told of her punishment, Sister Marie asked only one question. What will you tell the world? That you were a woman deceived by pride, Inda, answered the cardinal. That no miracle occurred, only sin. She smiled faintly. Then let the child speak for me. When a barren woman bears life, the world will decide whom God favored, you or me. That night the chapel was sealed. The instruments removed, the door bricked shut. The church buried its shame in stone, but some secrets resist burial. And somewhere in the darkness of that sealed room, the air still remembers a woman's defiance, and the miracle that may or may not have been heresy. When Sister Marie Terzlair left Savannah under armed escort in December 1748, the city exhaled in relief. The scandal that had scorched its reputation was finally being carried away across the marshes, hidden beneath the church's cloak of silence. Her destination was Charleston, a city of merchants, sailors and priests, where whispers traveled faster than ships. The church rented a modest 2-story house at the edge of town, away from markets and gossip, and placed guards at both ends of the street. Inside, all curtains were drawn. The neighbors were told the occupants were French sisters, caring for a sick relative. Sister Marie arrived pale but unbroken. She carried only a prayer book, a rosary, and the quiet certainty that the child within her would justify everything she had done. With her came 2 attendants, Sister Catherine Mercier, the convent's physician, and Sister Agnes Fontaine, the young nun who had first discovered the blood-stained nightdress months earlier. Between them stood an invisible wall of awe, pity, and fear. The church assigned Dr. Robert Drayton to oversee the pregnancy. A practical man, loyal to neither science nor superstition, he kept meticulous notes. In them he recorded his growing confusion. Her condition defies expectation. 51 years of age, long since barren, yet the fetus thrives. Her pulse strong, appetite steady. I find myself doubting what I know of anatomy. Each week he examined her by candlelight, measuring, listening, recording. He found no weakness, no fever, no threat of miscarriage. Even he began to whisper privately that something unexplainable was at work. Outside the house, Charleston's winter winds carried rumors like ash. Dock workers swore the church had hidden a miracle. Others claimed the woman was possessed. The truth sealed behind shutters belonged to a handful of people, and they had sworn never to speak of it. January 1749. The days passed in near silence. Sister Marie spent hours by the single window overlooking the garden, her hands resting on the curve of her abdomen, reading scripture and taking notes in neat French script. She spoke little, ate little, but her eyes glowed with a strange calm. To Sister Catherine it looked like faith. To Sister Agnes, madness. When Dr. Drayton offered laudanum to ease her restless nights, she refused. "I will not numb what God allows me to feel," she said. "Pain is proof that I am alive." By late January, her belly rose firm and round. Dr. Drayton wrote that the child's heartbeat was clear and strong as any I have heard. But he also noted something else, a fear he dared not voice. If this birth went wrong, if she died, he would carry the blame for the most dangerous secret in colonial America. On February 9, 1749, at 1:15 in the afternoon, the first contraction struck. Sister Marie dropped her book, gripping the table as pain rippled through her body. Sister Catherine sent for Dr. Drayton immediately. Within the hour he arrived with 3 midwives, Hannah Morse, Rebecca Talbot, and Sarah Wickham, women trusted for their skill and their silence. They found Sister Marie pacing the floor, beads of sweat shining on her brow, murmuring fragments of psalms between breaths. She refused the birthing chair the midwives prepared. "I will bring her forth in my own way," she insisted. The labor was long. Hours passed. Candles burned low. The wooden clock in the hallway struck 8, 9, 10. Still she labored. The room smelled of wax, iron, and salt. Dr. Drayton watched her strength fade, but her will harden. He had seen younger women beg for mercy. This one only clenched her jaw and whispered prayers. At 9:30, her water broke with a sound that made everyone freeze. She looked to the doctor. "Do not use instruments," she said. "No steel shall touch what God has begun." The midwives obeyed. They wiped her face, held her hands, and counted the contractions as the night deepened. By midnight, the baby's head crowned, then stalled. The air grew heavy with fear. If the child remained trapped, both mother and infant could die. Dr. Drayton reached for his forceps. "No," she gasped. One more push, and from some pit of strength only faith can dig, she pushed, once, twice, and at 3:17 a.m. the cry of a newborn shattered the silence. "A girl," whispered Hannah Morse, tears in her eyes. Perfectly formed, healthy, Dr. Drayton exhaled, almost laughing. He examined the mother, pulse strong, bleeding minimal, skin flushed but stable. A miracle in any age. He cleaned his instruments, recorded the time, the weight, the condition. Then he made a note that would trouble him for the rest of his life. The birth proceeded without abnormality. The child robust, the mother resilient. Every principle of medicine declares this impossible. The church's orders were clear. The infant must be removed at once. But Dr. Drayton overruled them, briefly. 12 minutes, he told Sister Agnes. She must see the child or grief will kill her. Sister Marie held the girl as though holding proof of heaven. Her face, drained of pain, filled with light and sorrow. "They will call you sin," she whispered, "but you are my testimony. They will bury our names, but they cannot bury what breathes." When the midwife came to take the baby, she kissed the child's forehead once and let go. The door closed softly, and with it the sound of her heart breaking. By dawn, the infant was gone, carried to a waiting carriage bound for the Redmonds of Virginia, a wealthy couple long childless and desperate for a daughter. They were told the baby's mother had died in childbirth. They believed it. They named her Charlotte. Inside the Charleston house, Sister Marie lay staring at the wall. She did not eat for 3 days. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. "Did they baptize her?" "Yes," Sister Catherine said. "Father O'Brien performed it at dawn." "Then God has her," Marie murmured. "The church may have her name, but God has her soul." Weeks passed. Her body healed faster than anyone expected, but her mind did not. She wrote endlessly, letters, arguments, confessions, as if language were the only rope keeping her from drowning. Most were destroyed by church officials. 3 survived, hidden by Father O'Brien. In one she wrote, "They say I sinned by pride. Perhaps they are right. But what is faith if never tested? I offered myself, body and name, to prove that knowledge may serve devotion. If that is heresy, then God himself inspires heretics." Another letter was addressed to Thomas. "I lied to you. I forged your freedom for my purpose. I told myself the end was holy. But I treated you as instrument, not soul. If hell exists, I deserve its heat not for the child, but for you." Those who read that letter said the ink had blurred under tears. By April, the church had decided her fate. Exile. She would be sent north to the convent of the Sacred Heart in Quebec, a place of silence, where speech was forbidden and days passed in perpetual prayer. She would take new vows there, live without identity, and be listed in church records as dead. When Bishop Fenwick delivered the sentence, she listened without protest. Only once did she raise her eyes, and the child, "She will know nothing," he said. "She belongs to another family now. Her origin will never be spoken again." Sister Marie nodded slowly. "Then my purpose is complete. Let silence finish what faith began." On April 23, 1749, she boarded the merchant ship Harmony bound for Boston, then onward by land to Quebec. Sister Catherine accompanied her, writing in her journal, "She prays without words. She looks beyond the sea as if expecting to vanish into it." 3 weeks later, they reached the silent monastery. At evening vespers, the abbess welcomed her not with words, but with a gesture, finger to lips, head bowed. Marie stepped into the stone chapel, removed her veil, and knelt. From that moment, she spoke no more. Years later, fire would consume the convent of the Sacred Heart. No record would survive of whether she perished in the flames or lived long enough to watch them from her cell. To history, she died in 1749, erased by decree. To the walls that heard her prayers, perhaps she still breathes. As for the child, Charlotte Redmond, she grew among luxury and lies. She would never know the woman who bore her, or the young man whose blood flowed in her veins. And the church would ensure that no trace of that night in Charleston ever surfaced, except for one rumor, still whispered by a few old families, that on the night of her birth, thunder rolled over the harbor without a single cloud in the sky. When the church sealed the chapel at St. Catherine's and sent Sister Marie away, it also made another decision, quieter but crueler. Thomas, the 17-year-old enslaved boy whose name had become tangled with hers, would be sold and removed from Georgia, not as punishment, the bishop had written, but as protection. Protection, in the church's language, meant disappearance. Thomas was taken from the convent in the dead of night, hands bound not with rope but with linen, so no one on the streets would hear the sound of restraint. He did not resist. He had learned early that defiance meant death. The guards who escorted him said nothing. Their torches flickered like small halos of judgment in the darkness. By dawn they reached the docks at Savannah. A merchant vessel waited, the Mercy bound for Charleston. The harbor smelled of tar and salt, the masts creaking against the gray sky. Thomas was led aboard, chained below deck among crates of rice and barrels of molasses. The voyage took 2 days. In that cramped darkness, Thomas prayed, not for his safety. He knew what awaited Banatarai, but for understanding. The God he had been taught to fear and the God Sister Marie spoke of seemed like different beings entirely. One demanded obedience, the other demanded sacrifice. He had served both, and both had betrayed him. When the ship reached Charleston, he was taken ashore under guard. No crowd greeted him. The scandal was being contained. Within the bishop's residence, a small tribunal convened to decide his fate. He was too dangerous to keep in Georgia, too educated to release, too visible to execute. The solution was Boston, a distant city where few Catholics lived and fewer asked questions. On December 4, 1748, Thomas was sold to Isaac Peaton, a Protestant merchant who managed shipping and textile trade. The church paid part of the price in secret, ensuring that Peaton would keep silent about where his new worker had come from. Boston was colder than anything Thomas had known. Snow covered the rooftops and the harbor froze at night. He slept in a narrow room above the warehouse, his blanket thin, his dreams restless. Peaton gave him ledgers to copy, cargo lists to maintain, and letters to transcribe. The work suited him. Words were his only freedom. He did not speak of the convent or the woman who had promised him liberty. He tried to forget the nights in the chapel, the whispers, the candlelight, the weight of guilt he could not name. But memory has a cruel persistence. Every quill stroke felt like confession. Every candle that guttered in the draught reminded him of her voice. "You are helping me serve God." Boston's people watched him with wary curiosity. A black man who read and wrote was a rarity. An enslaved one who handled a merchant's accounts was almost unthinkable. Some called him dangerous, others unnatural. He kept his head down and his voice low, but rumor is louder than silence. In March of 1749, a sailor who had crewed on the Mersey returned to Boston. In a tavern near the docks after too much rum, he boasted of the papist experiment he had heard about in Georgia. A nun with child, a black boy involved, a church covering its shame. The story spread through the city like fire through dry grass. Reverend Jonathan Cole of the Old North Church seized upon it. He preached of Catholic corruption, of demonic deception, of a servant of darkness who had dared to defile a woman of God. He never named Thomas, but the implication was clear. Within days, Cole and his followers began searching. They questioned dock workers, merchants, ship captains. When they learned of Isaac Peaton's newly purchased literate slave from Charleston, they needed no further proof. On the morning of March 10th, they appeared at Peaton's warehouse, 6 men in black coats carrying Bibles and righteous fury. Peaton met them at the door. "This man is mine," he said calmly. "He works for me and has broken no law." "He is an instrument of heresy," Reverend Cole replied. "He aided a false miracle." "You harbor sin under your own roof," Peaton's face hardened. "Then let God judge him as he will judge you." For 3 tense hours they argued in the icy air. Outside a crowd gathered, dockhands, apprentices, housewives drawn by the noise. Boston's fear of Catholic plots was an old wound, and this scandal tore it open again. At last the Reverend withdrew, but his final words were a promise. "This is not finished. The devil's work will not hide among honest men." That night, Peaton went to Thomas's room. He found him at his desk, writing by candlelight, not letters for the merchant, but words for himself. "I cannot keep you here," Peaton said quietly. "By tomorrow they will return with more men. I won't hand you over, but if you stay, they'll burn this place to the ground." Thomas looked up. "Then where will I go?" "To Halifax," Peaton said. "I have a ship, the Providence. It sails at dawn. You'll go as a clerk. There's a man there, William Barrett, who owes me favors. He'll take you in." "It's not freedom, but it's distance." "Sometimes that's the same thing." Thomas gathered what little he owned, a coat, a quill, a small notebook. Inside its worn pages he wrote one line before closing it. "Even God's miracles require witnesses." At sunrise he boarded the Providence. The sea was frozen near the shore, shards of ice knocking against the hull like bones. As the ship left the harbor, Boston faded into mist behind him. The voyage north was brutal. The Atlantic roared for 12 days, and cold seeped into every joint. The sailors treated him with indifference. To them he was just another cargo hand. But Thomas worked silently, organizing manifests, copying invoices, grateful for the distraction of numbers that demanded precision, but not belief. Halifax was young then, a settlement of rough timber and mud, half built, half dreamed. Smoke hung in the air from soldiers' fires. The people spoke in a dozen accents, but all looked weary. William Barrett, a Scottish merchant in his 40s, met the ship at dock. He examined Thomas with the practical eye of a man who saw people as labor, not mystery. "You can read?" "Yes, sir." "Keep accounts?" "Yes." "Then you'll do." The last man drank himself to death. "You'll live above the warehouse. Food and clothing provided. Work begins at dawn." And so it began again. The quiet life of a man erased. Through the spring and summer, Thomas managed ledgers, correspondence, shipments for the British garrison. He wrote with care, kept records flawlessly, and asked for nothing. Barrett appreciated his efficiency and left him mostly alone. Halifax was too far from Savannah, too cold, too Protestant for gossip about nuns and miracles. But solitude brings its own torment. The nights were long, the wind merciless. Thomas wrote by candlelight until the wax burned out. He wrote letters he could never send. To Sister Marie, to the unborn child, to the God who had watched and remained silent. In one surviving fragment, found decades later in a collapsed chest within Barrett's warehouse, he had written, "They call me sinner, yet I never touched her. They call her deceiver, yet she brought forth life." Perhaps sin and miracle are the same thing viewed from different sides of fear. The winter of 1749-1750 was harsher than any before. The harbour froze solid, food grew scarce, and men died of cold in their beds. Thomas survived barely. His hands cracked from frost. His lungs burned with every breath. Still he worked. By spring his cough had deepened. Barrett noticed but said nothing. When another clerk offered to take his place for a week, Thomas refused. He feared that if he stopped, he might disappear, not in death but in memory. Then, one morning in late September, he failed to appear at the warehouse. His bed was empty, his belongings gone. Barrett waited 2 days, then wrote a single line in his account book. "The Negro clerk departed my service. Destination unknown." Some said he had died in the woods seeking firewood during a storm. Others whispered that he had joined a group of freedmen who settled near Preston, carving homes from frozen earth. A few believed he took passage farther north, to places where names meant nothing, and pasts could be buried. No record of him ever reappeared. Only that one line, a quiet erasure of a man who had witnessed the church's deepest shame. Yet his story did not end entirely. 2 years later, in 1752, a land grant near Preston listed a Thomas among new settlers. No surname, no age, only that he could sign his name. An unusual thing for any freedman in Nova Scotia. The signature, thin and careful, resembled those on the convent's old records. Perhaps it was him. Perhaps not, but if it was, then somewhere among the cold pines of Canada lived the last witness to Savannah's forbidden miracle, a man who had carried both sin and sanctity in his trembling hands. He would never know that the woman who had used him spent her final years in silence, or that the child she bore lived a comfortable life, ignorant of the scandal that created her. He would never know that the church succeeded in erasing both their names from history. And yet even erased lives leave traces. Words survive, paper endures, and somewhere in the brittle pages of an old account book, written in his careful hand, the truth remains, that once, in a chapel now buried behind limestone walls, a woman sought to prove faith through science, and a boy believed her. The child born in secrecy beneath Charleston's grey skies was carried north before she ever learned her mother's scent. Her journey began before dawn, wrapped in linen and silence in the arms of a hired nurse who had been paid to forget. The carriage left the rented house on Meeting Street, moved through narrow alleys still wet from rain, and crossed the Ashley River Bridge as the first light broke across the horizon. By the time the sun reached the rooftops, Charleston no longer remembered that a miracle or a scandal had taken place. Her destination was Richmond, Virginia, where Jonathan and Susanna Redmond waited. They were a prosperous couple, childless after 10 years of marriage, their prayers for a family gone unanswered. The church had chosen them carefully, loyal Catholics, discreet and wealthy enough to keep questions at bay. The letter from Charleston called the infant a gift of Providence to be raised as your own. When the nurse placed the baby into Susanna's arms, the woman wept. "She is perfect," she whispered. "God has remembered us." Jonathan only nodded, his eyes wet but wary, already rehearsing the story they would tell their neighbors, that after years of disappointment, Savannah had miraculously conceived late in winter and given birth a month early. The doctor they paid would sign the papers, and the church would seal the lie with its blessing. They named her Charlotte. In the Redmond household, Charlotte grew amid comfort and piety. The years that followed left no trace of her true beginning. She was baptized before her first month had ended, her name inscribed in the parish register as the daughter of Jonathan and Susanna Redmond. She wore silk dresses from London, played with ivory toys from France, and slept beneath a silver crucifix above her cradle. At night, her mother knelt beside her and prayed, thanking God for granting the child she'd always dreamed of. The church's deception had worked so perfectly that even the guilty began to believe their own invention. Charlotte was a quiet child, thoughtful, observant, unusually serious for her age. Servants whispered that she rarely cried, that she would sit for hours watching dust float through sunlight, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Her father called her our little philosopher. Her mother simply called her Miracle. As she grew, her resemblance to the Redmonds became an unspoken discomfort. Her hair was darker, her eyes deep brown instead of grey, her skin warmer in tone, her frame taller, stronger. Family friends explained these things away as quirks of ancestry. But in quiet moments, Susanna would look at her daughter and feel an unease she could not name, a faint echo of another woman's face she had never seen. Education became Charlotte's sanctuary. Tutors taught her to read and write in both English and French. She learned scripture, music, history, and the languages of polite society. She excelled in all of them, yet often paused at the parts of the Bible that spoke of birth and promise. In Luke's Gospel, she underlined the verse, "For with God nothing shall be impossible." She could not explain why it moved her so deeply. In her teenage years, Richmond was a city of candle-lit parlors and rigid manners. Balls, picnics, Sunday services, life arranged in predictable rhythms. Charlotte followed them dutifully but without passion. When other girls whispered about love, she listened quietly, eyes distant. Something within her seemed to wait for a purpose she could not yet imagine. At 19, she married Edward Fitzgerald, the son of a Philadelphia merchant. The match was arranged, respectable, and convenient. Edward was kind, cautious, ambitious in business, but mild in spirit. He admired his wife's calm intelligence, her grace, her restraint. Their union produced 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter. And if love never burned brightly between them, it glowed steadily enough to keep them warm. The years smoothed Charlotte's youth into gentleness. She hosted dinners, organized church fundraisers, played the piano on Sunday evenings. To neighbors, she was a model of virtue, elegant, composed, unblemished by scandal. But sometimes when she was alone, she would stand before the mirror and feel a tremor of strangeness. Her reflection seemed to watch her back with a question she could not answer. Whose eyes are these? Whose blood sings in me? In one letter to her mother, dated June 1771, she confessed a fragment of this unease. Sometimes I feel as though I am living another woman's life, Mama. Not unhappily, Edward is kind, the children are healthy, but when I look at myself, it's as if I see a stranger behind my own eyes. Perhaps every woman feels this at times. Still, it lingers, Susanna replied with tender dismissal. All women wonder what other paths God might have written for them. Do not trouble yourself with shadows, my dearest. You are exactly who you are meant to be. But Susanna's hand trembled as she sealed the letter. The church's secret had grown heavy with years. The bishop who arranged the adoption was long dead, the priest transferred, the documents sealed in Charleston's archives. Only she and Jonathan still carried the truth, and they never spoke of it aloud. Even between them, the silence remained sacred. Charlotte never learned that the blood in her veins carried 2 worlds, the strict devotion of a French nun and the stolen hope of an enslaved boy. No one told her that her birth had been debated in tribunals, recorded in burned letters, and silenced by fear. She lived and died believing herself an ordinary woman of faith and fortune. In 1822, at 73 years old, she passed away quietly in Philadelphia, surrounded by children and grandchildren. Her obituary in the Philadelphia Gazette described her as a woman of exemplary virtue devoted to charity and constant in faith. No mention of miracles. No hint of scandal. When her daughter Eleanor sorted through her belongings, she found a small wooden box among her mother's keepsakes. Inside lay a wedding ring, a few pressed flowers, and a single page torn from a Bible, Luke chapter 1 verses 34 to 37. The words were underlined in faint brown ink. How shall this be, seeing I know not a man? For with God nothing shall be impossible. Eleanor thought it curious. Perhaps her mother had chosen the verse for comfort in old age. She folded it carefully, placed it back in the box, and never spoke of it again. That page would pass through generations of the Fitzgerald family, carried from trunk to trunk, from attic to attic, its origin forgotten. But for those who believe that memory clings to objects, that faith leaves fingerprints, perhaps that page still carries something of Sister Marie's defiance, something of Thomas's hope, something of the secret that began in the sealed chapel of Savannah. And so, without knowing it, Charlotte Redmond Fitzgerald became the living continuation of a miracle the world was never meant to remember. Her laughter, her prayers, her children, each one a quiet contradiction of the Church's silence. While the men of God bricked up the walls of St. Catherine's and burned the evidence of what had happened, the truth they tried to erase continued to walk the earth in human form, wearing the face of innocence. They said the story ended in shame and exile, but it did not end at all. It simply changed its name. By the time the century turned, the convent of St. Catherine no longer belonged to the living. The whitewashed buildings that had once gleamed like a beacon of devotion stood grey and hollow beside the Savannah River. Ivy crawled up the walls. Roots split the stone, and gulls nested in the crumbling eaves. The laughter of schoolgirls, the echo of hymns, the whisper of silk habits, all had vanished. Only silence remained, heavy and deliberate. In 1758, the Church closed the convent officially, its reputation too poisoned to recover. Enrollment had fallen to almost nothing. The daughters of plantation owners were withdrawn by their families, their dowries returned with polite excuses. The bishop in Charleston signed the final decree with relief. The scandal, he believed, was buried. A wealthy merchant named Samuel Dawkins purchased the property soon after. He cared nothing for faith, only for space. The convent became a warehouse, its halls filled with crates of rice, sugar, and indigo. Workmen tore down altars, burned pews for heat, and ripped out iron candle holders to melt for scrap. But one part of the building they did not touch. The chapel where Sister Marie Terzlair had performed her experiment was sealed under orders from the diocese. They told Dawkins it was unsafe, the foundation unstable, the roof ready to collapse. But the letter bearing the seal of the Archbishop said more than it intended. No part of that chamber is to be disturbed, altered, or entered for any purpose whatsoever. Dawkins, a practical man, obeyed. He ordered masons to brick the entrance completely, layer upon layer of limestone and mortar, until the doorway vanished into the wall. Inside, the air thickened and stilled. The wooden altar, the marble basin, the glass instruments Sister Marie had once held, all were swallowed by darkness. The last echo of her voice faded, leaving only dust and silence. Savannah grew around it. New streets were paved, new houses built. The river trade prospered, fortunes rose and fell, and the story of the nun and the miracle became legend. By 1780, only the oldest citizens remembered fragments of the truth. They told them like ghost tales, of a woman who claimed to give birth without sin, of a slave who vanished into northern snows, of a chapel that cursed any man who entered it. Mothers warned their children not to walk too near the old warehouse after dark. Superstition had replaced history, which suited the Church perfectly. In Charleston, the last living witnesses were dying off one by one. Sister Catherine Mercier, who had held the newborn child for 12 minutes before surrendering her, died in 1772. Her final letter to a friend in Quebec contained only one unsettling line: "I have seen life where life should not be. I will never understand it." No one in the convent dared ask what she meant. In Quebec itself, the convent of the Sacred Heart burned in 1763 during the British siege. The Church declared all its sisters dead, and with them the woman who had once been Marie Terzlair. No burial record, no headstone, only the entry in the diocesan ledger. Died in Charleston, 1749. Thus, even in memory, she was erased twice, and yet, in spite of every effort, fragments of the forbidden story refused to die. Dr. Robert Drayton, the physician who had attended her birth, kept his journal until his death in 1771. In its final entry, written 3 days before a stroke claimed him, he confessed, "I have delivered hundreds of children, but never one such as that in February of 1749. Whether it was miracle or medicine, I cannot say. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. I die not knowing, and perhaps that is as it should be. In an archive in Charleston, those words slept for generations unread. The centuries passed. The warehouse that had once been the convent changed hands again and again. By the late 1800s, it stored tobacco and cotton. By the 1920s, it was abandoned, its roof sagging, its windows shattered. Vagrants slept in the corridors where nuns once prayed. Rain fell through the holes in the ceiling and pooled on the stone floors. The sealed chapel remained untouched, its doorway hidden behind a wall of dust-blackened brick. Then, in 1937, a team of local historians petitioned the city to preserve the site as a colonial relic. Their leader, a professor named Henry Addison, believed the convent held valuable insight into Savannah's early religious history. He received permission to conduct limited restoration, cleaning, cataloguing, mapping. Addison expected rot and ruin. What he found instead was mystery. Behind a section of crumbling plaster on the eastern wall, workers discovered a faint outline, an arch bricked over centuries earlier. When they tapped it, the hollow sound echoed like a heartbeat. Addison recorded in his notes, "Old masonry conceals what appears to be a doorway. Stonework predates later renovations. Diocese records make no mention. We will open carefully." It took 3 days to remove the bricks. The smell that escaped was like damp earth and candle smoke, as though the air inside had been holding its breath for nearly 200 years. What they found was not treasure or relics, but a room preserved in perfect stillness. The chapel's altar still stood, covered in dust. The air shimmered with motes of lime and age. On the wall behind the altar hung a wooden crucifix, its figure of Christ blackened by time. And on the stone floor beneath it, half buried under fallen plaster, lay a bundle of brittle papers tied with a faded strip of linen. There were 23 pages in total. Addison carried them into the light. The ink had browned, but the words were legible. They were letters, written in careful French script, the handwriting steady even as the sentences trembled with emotion. One began, "They will call me heretic, but I know what I saw." Another, "God does not fear knowledge. Only men do." The final letter ended without signature. "I have broken every vow except the one that matters. I have believed." Addison spent the night reading them by lamplight. By morning he understood that he had uncovered something the church had buried deliberately. He wrote to the Diocese of Savannah, requesting permission to publish the findings. The reply came swiftly and coldly. The discovery, they said, was of no historical consequence. They demanded the letters returned for proper archiving. Addison hesitated, then refused. "History," he replied, "does not belong to silence." 2 weeks later, his house burned to the ground. The cause was never proven. The original letters were lost. Only Addison's handwritten translations survived, hidden among his university papers, discovered decades later by another scholar. From those translations, historians pieced together the story that had haunted Savannah since colonial times: the nun who claimed a miracle, the boy who paid for it, the child who carried its proof. And beneath the limestone walls of the old convent, the sealed chapel still stands, its stones damp, its air unmoving, its silence absolute. Today, the warehouse is a museum. Visitors walk past the restored rooms, reading plaques about religious life in colonial Georgia. Most never notice the small wooden door at the far end of the hall, chained and marked "Do not enter." Those who linger claim they sometimes hear faint sounds from behind it, soft footsteps, the rustle of fabric, a woman's quiet breath. The curator insists it's just the settling of the building, but when the night guard makes his rounds, he avoids that hallway. He says that once, while checking the locks, he heard a voice whisper through the cracks in the door, low and steady, in an accent not heard for centuries, "I have believed."